exploring all the countries of the world with regards to the Jewish community history, rabbinic history, the structure in of itself. Now we are on the fourth part. We are speaking about the country Turkey over here. The fourth part, probably the final part, I think it is. It was a lot to cover within regards to this, and even to do it in 4 parts, this video was it took some justice to do it, let's just say, in of itself. I wasn't able to really give over a few highlights, and much more could have been included within regards to it, but be it as it may, we are going to speak about the country Turkey over here today in special edition, the 4th part of it, and we are now looking towards the 20th century. We're in that specific time period in itself. We're going to explore some of the famous rabbis of Turkey and what went on in the various different points of time. And first of all, I wanted to speak about the earlier parts of the 20th century. Was a time period of, maybe you could say, more modernization in Turkey in itself within regards to rabbinate, and especially at the start of the 20th century or the end of the 19th century, it was a period where a rabbinical seminary we started up in Turkey, which we actually spoke about, I think, on a previous video a few months ago. I think it was especially, you could say that there was a movement of the Haskalah movement at that point in time would actually come about, I think, penetrated, let's say, in the area of Edirne, and through the philologist, someone named Joseph Halevi, who is Joseph Halevi, who we spoke about yesterday. He lived between 1827 to 1917, and let's just say there was, let's say, a specific role of the Edirne's, let's just say, the Maskilic thought, let's just say, in of itself, would maybe diffuse new ideas. It was only secondary when compared to the role of Istanbul or Salonika, but there would be the formation, I believe, of the Alliance Rabbinical Seminary. I think they would actually break off at a later stage in time. I think the Alliance Boys School actually opened, we're going back into the 19th century territory. I think in the year 1867 and 1870, the girls' school was formed at that stage in time. There was, I think, a poet, we didn't mention about him, I think, in the previous video, Rabbi Baruch Isaac Mitrani, who lived between 1847 to 1919, would actually be one of the main teachers of the Alliance School. So he was very much active towards a very early part of the 20th century. But he actually endeavored, let's just say, to implement new methods of education. And to achieve, I believe, these aims, he established a new school called Akedat Yitzchak. He would publish, I think, books. This is Rabbi Mitrani, I believe, on education in Hebrew and a grammar of spoken Judeo-Spanish. He edited the first newspaper, was published in Edirne, in Karmi. I think this was in the year 1871 to 1881. I think we brushed on this in the previous video. There was also another publication, the Kerem Sheli, which was published, I think, from 1890. It was both in Hebrew and in Ladino. And this actually called for the Jewish colonization in Palestine, national revival. Now, Rabbi Abraham Danon, who we're going to speak about more in depth in maybe in the coming minutes and next half an hour, he lived between 1857 to 1925. So I believe Rabbi Abraham Danon would actually lead, let's just say, this rabbinical seminary at that stage in time. He was, let's just say, a pupil of Joseph Halevi, and he established under the latter's influence the Dorshei Haskalah group. I think this was in 1888. He edited the historical periodical, something called Yosef Da'at, which was in Hebrew and Ladino. This was in order, let's say, to collect and publish Jewish historical studies. I think the periodical was closed down by the government after a short time. Now, in 1891, Rabbi Danon opened this rabbinical seminary that taught both secular and religious subjects. The teaching was partly in Turkish at that stage in time, a major innovation for the period it was seen as. Now, I don't think the seminary itself, I don't know, it was like a huge success, you could say. Many of the more rabbis on the right would definitely not be for it. You could say there was a modernization at that point in time. But I think the seminary moved to Istanbul. The teaching was partly in Turkish, and the seminary, I think, was moved to Istanbul right at the end of the 19th century, in the year 1898. With, I think, at that point in time, they had 11 students. I think what they tried to do was look into quality as opposed to quantity of students. I think in his writings, he attempted to reconcile traditional and Western knowledge with the Ladino press. Was a major, let's say, printed product of that specific period of time. That's what we have to stress over. Now, very, very interesting. Anyone tuning in at the moment, please subscribe to the channel. We're exploring the history of the country Turkey over here in this special edition. So we said that there was 11 students in 1898. The Ladino press, as we said before, was a major printed product of the period. There was someone of the name Joseph Barishak. He would edit the major political litany. It's called the Jewish Journal of Edirne. It was called the Laboz de la Verdad. Now, this was right at the start of the 20th century, I think. The voice of truth, you could say, he named it, between 1911 to 1922. There was also another famous person named Nissim Behar would publish a weekly, I think it was actually under the name L'Echo de Adrien Paul. This was in French, actually, between 1922 and 1921 to 1922. And many of the graduates of, let's say, Alliance would join the newly founded alumni associations. I think there was a B'nai B'rith Lodge, which was established at the start of the 20th century. In 1911, there was associations, reading clubs, mutual aid fraternities, chiefly meant to support and propagate the new trends of modernization among the community's members. Remember, it was going through a much modernization time period in of itself. I think they contributed to the westernization, let's say, and secularization of the local community. In 1905, I think there was a great fire, which I think 13 synagogues were burned. I don't know if they were totally burned to the ground, but definitely got affected in Edirne at that stage in time, which we have to point out over here. That would cause a lot of obviously problems and so on and so forth. But there was the community constructed a new synagogue, I think, come 1907, which was modeled on the synagogue of Vienna. I think Vienna also had a rabbinical seminary at that point in time, which would accommodate 1,200 mitpalim. This is people, obviously, people that will pray inside that synagogue also respectively, which is something that we have to point out. 900 men and 300 women. So there was an Ezrat Nashim and was designated to demonstrate the community's achievements. Let's say more modernity. So many of the, let's just say, the more religious rabbis would definitely not be for the modernity that would take place at that point in time, and the secularization would take an effect, as I say, in the religious observance level in Turkey, which would have a detrimental effect. We have to point out, I'm just going to say a blessing. Now, at the moment, anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of Turkey, the Jewish community. It's part number 4, and I'm just going to say a blessing, and please subscribe to the channel in the meantime and join our community over here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. Now we're going to speak about Rabbi Abraham Danon and more of those rabbis, and some of them were maybe connected to that rabbinical seminary. I recommend everyone to check out the video on our channel on the Turkish rabbinical seminary, also respectively. So Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi I want to speak about first. We did a video about him quite recently. It was his Hilula. He lived between 1872 to 1960. He was a jurist, he was a linguist, and really, really prominent, let's just say, in the earlier part of the 20th, mid part of the 20th century. So he was born actually in Manisa in Turkey in the year 1872, and he would actually learn in a yeshiva in Tiberias, in Tiberia, which is one of the 4 holy cities of Israel. We have to point out this was he would study at a French lycée for secondary education, and then obtained a degree in Islamic law in Istanbul. He attended a rabbinical seminary academy in Paris. Maybe we'll speak about that at a later stage in time. He would receive his rabbinic ordination there. At the same time, he would study various other subjects like philosophy, history, linguistics at the Sorbonne schools of Oriental languages. Now, upon his return to Constantinople, Rabbi Nachum occupied various teaching positions, including at the Turkish Military Academy. While there, he became acquainted, I think, with many of the leaders, the Young Turk movement, who gained power, I think, come out the year 1908. Very interesting. Now, in the previous class, we spoke about Rabbi Moses Levi Effendi, who was also a Chacham Bashi, a chief rabbi before Rabbi Nachum would become. So in 1909, he would actually take this role as a Chacham Bashi of the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. And it's stated over, Rav Nachum invested much effort in the restoration of communal institutions. He found a fervent advocate in the person of someone named David Fresco, who he happened to have been the editor of the El Tiempo. This happened to have been a Ladino newspaper, who, let's say, politically supported the positions of the Turkish reformers at that point in time. So maybe more on the left of the side of the religious community. I think during the First World War, he strove to be appointed as ambassador of the Ottoman Empire. I don't think he got this position in of itself. Now, there was peace negotiations following the Turkish War of Independence, or would follow the First World War. Rabbi Nachum was a representative of the Ottoman Jews, was a member of Turkish delegation that famously signed the Lausanne Treaty for his services to the Turkish government, and he would be given this title of Effendi. So it wasn't, I think Rabbi Moses Levi would get the title Effendi. Also Rabbi Chaim Bajarna, I think, will also get this title of Effendi, if I'm not mistaken. Also, he would be a later chief rabbi. Also, in 1923, he would receive an invitation from Moise Katau Pasha. He was the head of the Jewish community of Cairo to become the chief rabbi of Egypt. So he was very, very well traveled and a people's person. He would be appointed a senator of Egypt's legislative assembly and was a founding member of the Royal Academy of the Arabic Languages. Among his many scholarly works was a translation into French of all Ottoman firmans or edicts sent to the governors and rulers, let's say, of Egypt by the Sublime Porte, I think from Turkish conquest of Egypt in 1517 until the late 19th century. Now, he would write very simple works, especially on the history of the Egyptian Jewish community, which was seen very, very important. I think about 1944, he helped reconstitute the Société d'études historiques juives d'Égypte. I think it was Society of Historical Study of the Jews in Egypt, and he served as its honorary head at that point in time. Now, Rabbi Nachum was also, let's say, active in international affairs, assisting in the establishment of contacts between Jews throughout the world. He visited Ethiopia and arranged for several Ethiopian Jews, I believe, at that stage in time, to actually study in Egypt. Until the German occupation of Rhodes, he was a great supporter of the Sephardic yeshiva on the island and sent many young men to study over there. Remember, we spoke about the famous rabbinical seminary in Rhodes, I think around June, July time, if I'm not mistaken. As I say, the formation of Medinat Israel, the creation of Israel itself, this in 1948, late 1940s, led to increased economic and political hardship for Egypt's Jewish community. Hundreds were arrested and interned for Zionistic activity. Jewish businesses were confiscated. Jewish bank accounts were frozen. Exit visas could be approved only by a special government agency for Jewish affairs. Rabbi Nachum attempted to ameliorate the effect of these developments for his community with mixed success at that point in time. He was a supporter, let's just say, of Ottomanization, and seemingly he opposed, definitely at one stage in time, Zionism, though he was willing to assist some of their goals, allowing Jewish immigration to settle in Palestine and purchase, let's say, by land, thereby non-citizens, let's just say. But around 1950, at the age of 78, Rabbi Nachum, I think, would lose his eyesight, but would continue on his duties as best as he could. He would officiate at the Shara Shemaim synagogue and would give long quotations from the Hebrew Bible and rabbinical texts from memory. He became greatly, let's say, he saw the decline, let's just say, of Egyptian Jewry at that point in time. That took a toll on him. And he had various different medical problems, and he, I think, passed away in 1960. He was at the age of 88 years old. He was buried at the Basitin Cemetery outside Cairo, and his funeral was not just attended by many Jews, by thousands, including Muslims and Christians also. In the decades, let's say, that followed, much of the cemetery, unfortunately, was vandalized and desecrated. And Rabbi Nachum's tomb, I think, apparently, according to Wikipedia, will be inhabited by squatters. Now, he wrote different books. I think in 1900, a book, 1909, another one, I think, historic book of the Falashaz, the La Literature Karaite in Turkey. This was in 1912, and the Traduction of Français commented de 1064 Firmans, I think 1932 was actually published, which I recommend everyone else. Now, he was close to, I think, or maybe had a connection with someone, there was another famous person at that point in time, so named Emmanuel Carasso. Who was he? He lived between 1862 to 1934. He was also, I think, very much involved in Turkey. He was actually born in Salonika in 1869, would pass away in Trieste. He was an Ottoman lawyer, a member of the prominent Sephardic Jewish Carasso family of Ottoman Salonika, and he was a prominent member of the Young Turks. The name is also spelled Karazo, Karusu, Karso, Karasu, very much, and there's other, I think, vernaculars, let's say. And the form Karasu is a Turkification of his name, meaning literally dark water. Emmanuel's nephew was a famous physician, Isaac Carasso, Also, I think it was a Salonika-born Sephardic Jew from Ottoman Empire who began producing the Danone yogurt in Barcelona in Spain in 1919. So it's interesting. Emmanuel Carasso will be the member of the Chamber of Deputies of Salonika between 1908 to 1912. And he died in Italy, but I think he was part of the political party, Committee of Union and Progress. And I think he was member and later president of the Macedonian Resort of Masonic Lodge in Saloniki, if I'm not mistaken, pioneered the Masonic movement, let's just say it himself. And they had secret societies in Salonika, meeting places for sympathizers of young Turks, including the Talat Pasha, if I'm not mistaken. And he was offered various positions in Ottoman government, turned them down, but he was one of the 4 men who told Sultan Abdul Hamid II of his deposition in April 1909. He worked for cooperation of various Jewish organizations in the Ottoman Empire, including the B'nai B'rith, also, we have to point out, and insisting that Ottoman Jews were Ottoman first and Jews second. So that, I don't know, obviously we as an Orthodox channel will want to strive that our Jewish and Judaism, obviously, it comes first, so we disagree with that notion, that's for sure. He was a member of the committee which negotiated the treaty ending the Italo-Turkish War at that point in time, and of the Committee of Internalize of the city of Salonika. And yeah, very, very interesting. So I think he was actually buried in Jewish cemetery in Anvar Koy in Istanbul, if I'm not mistaken, in 1934. So that's what we're speaking about over here. Friends, anyone joining in live, we're doing a live recording over here. And we're speaking about the Jewish community history of Turkey here on this special edition here. So everyone that's welcoming and you're in the, just join the channel, please subscribe to the channel now as we explore the history of Turkey country, part number 4 of this special edition. Let's go back a bit and speak about the earlier part of the 20th century itself. Let's say the early Republic period. Obviously, the Jewish population of Ottoman Empire had reached nearly 200,000 people at the start of the 20th century. The territories lost between 1829 to 1913 to new Christian Balkan states significantly lowered, I think this number. There was a troubled history, let's say, of Turkey during the 20th century, and the process of transforming the old Ottoman Empire into a secular nation state after 1923. However, I think it had a negative effect on the size of all remaining minorities, especially including Jewish people. After 1933, a new law put into effect in Nazi Germany for mandatory retirement of officials from non-Aryan race. Thus, the law required all Jewish scientists in Germany to be fired. Unemployed scientists led by, let's say, Albert Einstein formed an association in Switzerland, and Professor Schwartz was General Secretary of the association, met with the Turkish Minister of Education in order to provide jobs for 34 Jewish scientists in Turkish universities, especially in Istanbul University. Now, I think come 1933, Turkey accepted more than 1,000 Jews, most of whom were intellectuals and scientists, into Istanbul, contributing to the modernization of the Turkish state, spearheaded by the Ataturk. They restructured the newly established Istanbul University. They would introduce European-style academic standards, research methods, and pedagogical practices. These, let's say, immigrants trained a new generation of Turkish academic doctors, lawyers, engineers, which were, let's say, raising maybe the education, the secular education, and professor expertise. That's something that we had to point out at that stage in time. And so, yeah. So there was, I think, someone with the name, another key person, Ernst Hirsch. He was an exiled Jewish scholar and a lawyer, helped the Turkish authorities in modernizing Turkish contemporary law, I think, which still carried some substantial remnants from the Ottoman Code. He authored textbooks, several of them, that were used for years after the Second World War, and I think the acceptance of these intellectuals wasn't so much a humanitarian effort as it was a Turkish government's efforts, let's say, to modernize and to westernize at that stage in time. So that's very interesting. I believe there was a planned, I think at that point in time, deportation of Jews, if I'm not mistaken, from East Thrace, if I'm not mistaken. And this would be at the associated anti-Jewish pogrom in 1934 was one of the events that caused insecurity at that point in time among the Turkish Jews. So we can see there was anti-Semitism all the time over here inside, all throughout the various different countries. That's something that we definitely have to point out. Also, there was, I think before just going back, the planned deportation of the Jews from East Thrace and the associated anti-Jewish pogrom, I think in 1934, was one of the events obviously that brought about, let's say at that stage in time, insecurity among the Turkish Jews. Before the start of the programs, there was someone named Ibrahim Tali Ungoren, the Inspectorate General of the Trekkia Inspectorate General, suggested to remove the Jews from the region as it presented an economic threat to the Muslim population. In 1934, the Turkish government expelled all the Jews from Aden and the Straits. I think the effect of 1942, the Varlik Vergisi, it was a wealth tax, I think, was solely on non-Muslims, who still control the largest portion of the young republic's wealth, even though in principle it was directed against all the wealthy Turkish citizens. It most intensely affected, I think, non-Muslims. And the wealth tax, I think, is still remembered, if I'm not mistaken, as a catastrophe among the non-Muslims of Turkey. And it had one of the most detrimental effects on the population of Turkish Jews. Many people were unable to pay the exorbitant taxes, were sent to labor camps, and in consequences, about 30,000 Jews immigrated. The tax was seen as a racist attempt to diminish the economic power of religious minorities in Turkey. So that's, you can see anti-Semitism that came on, but seemingly it affected everyone in Turkey. A key person in Turkey at that point in time was someone of the name Morris Shinasi. He lived between 1855, passed away on September the 10th in 1928. He was an Ottoman-born, wealthy American business in the tobacco industry. He was actually born in Manisa, also in Turkey, Ottoman Empire. At that point in time, they weren't such a wealthy Sephardic family. Parents as well. At age of 9, he contracted something called diphtheria. He was treated by a Muslim physician named Sinasi and regained his health. And his parents named him henceforth Morris Sinasi as a gesture of hakarat hatov, gratitude. He had two brothers, Solomon, also known as Shlomo, and Yaakov, and a sister Sultana. He was forced to leave school and worked in the Jewish cemetery as a guard. At the age of 15, he left Turkey for Alexandria in Egypt, where he lived until he was, I think at that point in time, 30 years of age. It was, I think, then that the Garfalo, who was a successful Greek tobacco merchant, would inform Dr. Shinasi in Alexandria, determined that Shinasi should seek his fortune in America. And I think come on to 1890, he would emigrate to the United States of America. It was actually reported over, if I'm not mistaken. So that's he's another key figure, let's just say, on Turkish Jewry in himself. So let's speak about the Second World War. I think Turkey was officially neutral, although it maintained strong diplomatic relations with Nazi Germany. So you can see it wasn't really totally neutral then. You can definitely say that. Now, during the war, Turkey deneutralized 5,000 Jews living abroad. 5,000 Turkish Jews were deported to Nazi concentration camps such as Auschwitz, Sobibor, and other extermination camps. I think while Nazi Germany encouraged neutral countries to repatriate their Jewish citizens, Turkish diplomats received instructions to avoid repatriating Jews, even if they could prove their Turkish nationality. Turkey was also the only neutral country to implement anti-Jewish laws during the war. More Turkish Jews suffered as a result of discriminatory policies during the war than were saved by Turkey, we have to point out. Just reading this from Wikipedia, actually. Although Turkey had promoted the idea that it was a rescue of Jews from the Holocaust, is considered a myth by historians, and this myth was used to promote American genocide denial. Turkey served as a transit of European Jews fleeing Nazi persecution during the 1930s to 1940s. I think there was a memorial stone with a bronze epitaph was inaugurated in 2012 as a third of the individual country. The memorials after Poland, Netherlands, at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp for 8 Turkish citizens, I think, that were killed during Nazi regime in the said camp. The Turkish ambassador to Berlin, someone named Hüseyin Avni Karsiloglu, stated in an inauguration speech that Germany set free 105 Turkish citizens held in camps after a mutual agreement between the two countries, and these citizens returned to Turkey in April 1945. Now, although I think there is no known official record for other Turkish Jews who died during the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, this was reported over in Wikipedia. According to someone named Rifat Bali, Turkish authorities bear some responsibility for the Struma disaster, which killed about 781 Jewish refugees and 10 crew, due to the refusal to allow the Jewish refugees on board to disembark Turkey. I think someone named William Rubenstein goes further, asserting British pressure on Turkey not to let Struma's passengers disembark, in accordance with Britain's White Paper of 1939, to prevent further Jewish immigration to Israel, then Palestine at that point in time. Now, I think the important Turkish diplomats during the Holocaust included Nekdet Kent, Selahattin Uykman, and Namik Kemal Yolga, if I'm not mistaken. Also, that's very, very interesting, friends, over here. Anyone tuning in live, we are exploring the history of the country Turkey, the Jewish community history over there. I'm just going to take a short 1 minute break over here, so please, in the meantime, subscribe to our channel, and we're going to continue speaking about the country and the emigration of Turkey from Turkey to Israel. So I'll be back in 1 minute, friends, over here.
I got a notification of a sale that it's for today only, no mom, which is already 17%, and 15% on the large appliances. 15% plus 17% not mom is significant. Right. I just don't want it to be. I'm nervous because I'm feeling like the symptoms are it's nothing. I'm like, I'm going to take a break. See, the doctor may not see this, so I know you, and anybody who knows me knows that it's not. Right.
So thanks everyone for tuning in and waiting over here. We're just going to continue the series where we are exploring the history of the Jewish country Turkey, the rabbinic history, what actually went on during that specific period of time. Now we're speaking about the immigration from Turkey to Israel. So at that point in time, now when the Republic of Turkey was established in the year 1923, Aliyah was not particularly popular amongst Turkish Jewry at that point in time. Migration from Turkey to Palestine was very minimal in the 1920s. Now, between 1923 to 1948, approximately 7,300 Jewish people emigrated from Turkey to mandatory Palestine. Now, after the 1934 Thrace pogroms, following the 1934 Turkish resettlement law, it's estimated that 521 Jews left for Palestine from Turkey. I think in 1934, and 1,445 would leave in 1935. However, although the law of settlement may well have actually provoked the, let's say, incident's outbreak, the national authorities did not side with the attackers, but immediately intervened in the incidents. After order was restored, I think the governors at that point in time and mayors of the provinces were involved with the removal of office. Now, immigration to Palestine was organized, let's just say, by the Jewish Agency and the Palestine Aliyah Anoa organization. I think there was, we have to point out the Valik Vergesi, I think, was a capital tax which occurred in 1942, which we spoke about before, was also significant in encouraging immigration from Turkey to Palestine between 1943 to 1944. I think 4,000 Jewish people would emigrate at that point in time. Now, the Jews of Turkey reacted at that point in time very favorably to the creation of the State of Israel. Between 1948 to 1951, 34,547 Jews would immigrate to Israel, nearly 40% of the Turkish Jewish population at that point in time. Immigration was stunted for several months in November 1948, and when Turkey suspended, I think, migration permits as a result of pressure from Arab countries, we have to point out, so that would be at that window in time. I think in 1949, Turkey officially recognized Israel, becoming the first Muslim majority country to do so, and migration permits were reinstated and immigration continued. 26,000 emigrating within that year, and migration was entirely voluntary and was primarily driven by economic factors, given the majority of immigrants were, let's say, from the lower classes. In fact, the migration of Jews to Israel is the second largest mass immigration wave out of Turkey, the first being the population exchange between Greece and Turkey. And after 1951, immigration of Jews from Turkey to Israel would slow, let's say, perceptibility at that point in time. In the mid-1950s, 10% of those who had moved to Israel returned to Turkey, and a new synagogue called the Neve Shalom was constructed in Istanbul in 1951. We'll speak about that soon. And generally, Turkish Jews in Israel, let's say, integrate well into society and are not distinguishable from other Israelis. Now, I think they maintain the Turkish, let's say, culture, connection to Turkish, and are strong supporters of close relations, obviously, between Israel and Turkey. You know, the Democratic Party period, I think, was on the 6th or 7th of September 1955. The Istanbul pogrom was unleashed. Although primarily aimed at the city's Greek population, the Jewish Armenian communities of Istanbul also targeted to a degree. The damage caused was mainly as a material. Over 4,000 shops and 1,000 houses belonging to Greeks, Armenians and Jews were destroyed. Obviously, this would shock the minorities throughout the country. Now, let's speak about 21st century over here, Turkey. Over here. Anyone tuning in live, please subscribe to the channel now. We are nearing, at the moment, 8,000 subscribers, so welcome to our community. We've got fantastic content over here, so please subscribe. Okay, 21st century, the present size of the Jewish community, I think as of 2012, was estimated to be 17,400. This according to the Jewish Virtual Library. The vast majority, approximately 95%, would live in Istanbul now, and 2,500 will live in Izmir. Until the 2023 Turkey-Syria earthquake, much smaller communities was in Antakya, in Iskenderun, and I think the Sephardic Jewish community make up approximately 96% as of a recent survey of the Turkey Jewish population, while the rest, I think, are Ashkenazic Jewish people or Jewish from Italian extraction. There's also a small community of Romanite Jews, and the community of Constantinople, Karaites, let's just say, are related, I think, to each other. The city of Antakya was home to 10 Jewish families, I believe, numbering 20 members in 2014, many of whom were Syrian Jews of Mizrahi Jewish extraction, and some of them from Aleppo, especially. Even Syria can trace themselves back 2,500 years ago, let's just say. I think figures were once higher, but families left for Istanbul, Israel, other countries. Turkey Jews are still legally represented by Hakambashi. I think the most recent one happens to have been Rabbi Yitzhak Haleva, who I think passed away right at the start of 2025, and is assisted by a religious council made up of a Rosh Bet Din and 3 Chachamim, 35 lay councillors. They look after the secular affairs of the community, executive community or committee of 14, the president of which must be elected from among the lay councillors and runs the daily affairs. The Istanbul community, I think, has 16 synagogues and well-kept and guarded cemetery. As of the year 2001, the Jewish Museum of Turkey was founded by the Quintessential Foundation, an organization established in 1982, consisting of 113 Turkish citizens, both Jews and Muslims, to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Sephardic Jews to the Ottoman Empire. Very interestingly enough, over here. That's the 21st century, and yeah, very, very interesting. So I think, just to add on also, the Turkish Jewish population, I think, obviously now is experiencing decline. Obviously, large-scale immigration to Israel out of fear of anti-Semitism. but also because of natural population decline. Intermarriage there's been, unfortunately, with Turkish Muslims, and assimilation have become common, sadly, and the community's death rate is more than twice of its birth rate. As of 2022, the Jewish population in Turkey is now only about 14,500. And in 2023, Turkey-Syria earthquake, the leaders of the Jewish community of Antakya were killed. The Antakya synagogue was badly damaged, and the entire Jewish community, numbering 14 members, were evacuated from Antakya at that point in time. Now, the Jewish community, what's the languages? I think it's linguistically diverse. You could say Sephardic Jews spoke Judeo-Spanish, Ladino. French was used as a prestige language in the community. Sephardic Jews would shift to Turkish after the foundation of the Republic of Turkey. Ashkenazi Jews who spoke Yiddish or French and similarly would shift to Turkish. In Istanbul, many of the Jews would also speak Greek or Armenian until the mid, let's say, 20th century, given the city's ethnic diversity. The Jews in Hatay spoke Lebanese and Arabic also. And the 11 Jewish communities in Turkish Kurdistan would speak Kurdish, but the community doesn't, I think, exist anymore at present. Jews and their linguistic rights are officially recognized as a minority in Turkey by the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne. I think according to this treaty, officially organized, let's say, recognized minorities, Armenians, Greeks, and Jews use their mother tongue freely, especially for education purposes. As I say, French was also the medium of instruction in most Jewish schools run by the Alliance Israelite Universal of the Ottoman Empire. I think, however, the Turkish government would consider that for the purpose of the Treaty of Lausanne. The Minister of National Education refused to change its decision despite requests from the Jewish community. For that reason, Jewish schools switched from French to Turkish, I think, at a later stage in time. Anyone tuning in, please subscribe to the channel. We're a community here, and we're just going to take a short 1-minute break, so please subscribe in the meantime. Hi, Shalom, Iran. Hi, Shalom, Iran. Just sorry about that. There was just a short break over there with connection, and we're exploring the history of the Jewish community of Turkey here on this special edition. We're just speaking about the various languages that were spoken in Turkey. The various languages that were spoken in Turkey during yesteryear. Let's speak about anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, we've spoken all throughout the time period. I think, according to the researchers, anti-Semitism in the media and books was creating a situation in which young formed negative opinions against Jews in Israel. There was violence against Jews occurred, I think, in 2003. An Istanbul dentist was murdered in his clinic by a man who admitted that he committed the crime out of anti-Semitic sentiment. I think in 2009, there was a number of Jewish students suffered verbal abuse and physical attacks. And a Jewish soldier, I think, in the Turkish army also was assaulted. Now, most famously, I think the Neve Shalom synagogue in Istanbul had been attacked 3 times, reported over using Wikipedia as a source. I think first on the 6th of September in 1986, Arab terrorists gunned down 22 Jewish worshippers and wounded 6 during a Shabbat service at Neve Shalom. This attack was blamed on the Palestinians again during the 2023 Istanbul bombings, alongside the Bet Israel synagogue, killing 20 and injuring over, at that point in time, 300 people, both Jews and Muslims, along this front, and claimed responsibility for the attacks. Police claimed the bombings were too sophisticated to have been carried out by the group, with a senior Israel government source saying the attack must have been at least coordinated with international terror organizations over there. Now, I think traditionally, I think at that point in time, I think there was, just to talk about it, traditionally Aliyah from Turkey to Israel had been low since the 1950s, despite the anti-Semitism and occasional violence. This is from 1950s. Jews felt generally safe in Turkey, but in the 2000s, despite surging in 2008, 112 Jews would emigrate. In 2009, I think more would, at that point in time, more can be said with regards to that. Now, relations between Turkey and Israel, as we stated before, Turkey was one of the first countries to formally recognize the state of Israel. Turkey and Israel have cooperated military and economically. Israel and Turkey have signed multi-billion-dollar projects to build a series of pipelines from Turkey to Israel to supply gas and other essentials to Israel. In 2003, the Arkadas Association was established in Israel. The Arkadas Association is a Turkish-Jewish cultural center in Yehud, aiming to preserve the Turkish Jewish heritage and promote friendship, I believe, over there between Israeli and Turkish people. In 2004, the Ulkaman Sarfati Society was established by Jews and Turks in Germany. The society named the Selatin Ulkuman and Yitzhak Sarfati aims obviously to find intercultural and interreligious dialogue and wants to inform the public of the centuries of peaceful coexistence between Turks and Jews respectively. Now, the diaspora, the various migrations outside of Turkey has produced, let's say, descendants of Turkish Jews in Europe, Israel, United States, and Canada. Today, there are various synagogues that maintain Jewish-Turkish traditions. The Sephardic synagogue, I think, Bikur Cholim in Seattle, Washington, was formerly by Jews from Turkey and still uses Ladino in some portions of the Shabbat services, I believe. They created a siddur called Zechut Yosef, which was actually written by Chazan Isaac Azos to preserve their unique traditions. And in recent years, I think several hundred Turkish Jews who have been, let's say, able to prove they descend from Jews expelled from Portugal in 1497 have emigrated to Portugal and acquired Portuguese citizenship. So very, very interesting. So the previous chief rabbi was someone named who passed away in the 14th of January 2025 was Rabbi Ishak Haleva. Let's speak about him a little bit. He was a Chacham Bashi. He was actually born in 1940 on 27th of April. He was born in Istanbul in Turkey, and before he became the chief rabbi, he studied at a famous yeshivat, Porat Yosef in Jerusalem. He was the deputy of Rabbi David Asio for 7 years and became the new chief rabbi after Rabbi Asio passed away in 2002. He was a member also of the Presidium Council of the Alliance Rabbis of Islamic States. As we said before, he passed away in 2025. He was 84 years of age. It's interesting. He was born in Istanbul. I think while he was young, he would learn in a specific Beit Sefer, a Yehudi Biolo, if I'm not mistaken. And he would be Shiret Betseva Turkey. I'm not sure. It could be he served. There's some national service in Turkey itself. As we said before, he would learn in Yeshivat Porat Yosef. And it was a time period where there was great rabbis there, including Rabbi Yosef, Ovad Yosef was studying there, Rabbi Shimon Badani. And afterwards, he would receive rabbinic ordination. Ali Deha, Rabbi Ovad Yosef, the Turkey, so he would then settle in Turkey. He would learn amongst Rabbi Raphael Saban over there, and Rabbi Moshe Ben Chabib, who was another great rabbi there, and would start working various different roles in education in Turkey. He was part of the Jewish court in Turkey, the rabbinate itself in Turkey itself. He would vishimesh melatzel avrit, klasit umedornit, ולהיסטוריה של עם ישראל במסלול לתואר ראשון ולתוארים מתקדמים יותר במחלוקת לימודי תיאולוגיה של אוניברסיטת מרמה בנושאות סקריאס. He was working there in education all throughout the various places. החל משנת 90 של המאה, in the 1990s, השתתף במפגשים שבהם ערכו דיאלוגים בין דתיים בטורקיה ומחצולה. So we'll be working, dialoguing with all the Jews that say in Mikhaim, and so on and so forth, taking different, he was part of the European Jewish community, also the committee, and was partnering with them within various different things. In 1995, Lerech נבחר לשמש כסגנו של רבא ראשי של Turkey. He'll become the deputy to the chief rabbi of Turkey, Rabbi David Asio, come what the year 1995. So that was very, very prominent position, let's just say, at that point in time. So, yes, that's very interesting, which we have to point out. We can say more about it. I think Kamot, to get his position, I think, eventually as a chief rabbi. And most notably, I think in 2011, he would visit Israel and partner, let's say, within regards to the Sefer Turkia, which would come out, I think, from Miskeret Sidrat, Kehilat Yisrael, B'mizrach B'me'ot Tisha B'esra B'esrim. And I think it was also Shel Machon Yad Yitzchak Ben Tzvi, if I'm not mistaken, connected to Dr. Yaron Ben Na'a, if I'm not mistaken. And also, I think come 2015, he would partner, let's say, in a kenes, there was a gathering of the great rabbis, of the Orthodox rabbis, I think, at that stage in time. And He would take on various different. He would meet, I believe, be close to the president of Turkey, if I'm not mistaken, and very many of the dignitaries, let's just say, in itself. And it was very, very well traveled. And we spoke about him. We recorded a whole video over there, which I have to point out also. So if you look over the stories outside the Kim section here on the channel, you'll actually see a whole biography video within regards to him. Okay, let's explore about who was the rabbi before him of Turkey. It was someone named Rabbi David Asio. He was actually born in the year 1914. He passed away in 2002. He was a Hacham Bashi of the Republic of Turkey for a staggering 41 years, between 1961 to 2002, making him the second longest serving of the chief rabbis in Europe after Rabbi Moses Rosen of Romania. So that's very, very interesting. They do state that maybe that Rabbi Solomon Gaon was a chief rabbi between 1949 to 1994 of the Spanish Portuguese Jewish community, but that's very, very interesting. So so Rabbi Asio, I think, was second longest serving of the chief rabbis of Europe. I think in his career he spent 40 years as a chief rabbi and spiritual leader of Turkey. His deputy of 7 years, Rabbi Itzhak Levo, obviously succeeded him. We spoke about him just when he passed away in January 2015. He himself, Rabbi David Asio, was buried at the Julius Sephardic Jewish Cemetery in Istanbul. Let's explore a bit within regards to his life. So he was born in Istanbul, Rabbi Asio was. He would attend a religious school, I think in Haskoy. In 1928, he received, I think, the Lodge d'Orient B'nai Berith scholarship, I think, at that point in time, of the Rhodes Yeshiva. Remember, we spoke about the Rhodes Yeshiva, also in Greece, which was Talmudic Academy, a rabbinic program. He would study there for 6 years. I think he would become fluent in Italian, Greek, Ladino, in French, in Hebrew, and really would speak languages that were spoken by many of the Turkish general population, let's just say, in of itself. So that's very, very important to state over. Ladino he was speaking. So that was spoken. After his studies, he returned to Istanbul and became a Hebrew teacher at the Jewish high school in Istanbul. Now, from 1933 to 1936, he would complete his military service. In 1936, he became a member of the Bet in the Jewish court, and later became the secretary as well as a private secretary of the chief rabbi at that point in time, Rabbi Raphael Saban, in the rabbinical court. Now, come with the year 1955, Rabbi Asio became the headmaster and co-founder of an academy of Jewish learning in Haskoy. Now, Rabbi Asio would then become the chief rabbi on December the 9th, 1961. He represented the Jewish community in meetings with many notable political leaders. He represented the 22,000 Jews in Turkey, most of whom were descendants of the Sephardic Jews who fled Spain to Turkey in the 1400s. He was a chief rabbi during the Neve Shalom massacre. Unfortunately, you see that terrible anti-Semitism took place. An attack on the largest synagogue in Turkey, which killed 22 people, murdered 22 people in 1986 over there. So he was also a chief rabbi. Now, anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of the Turkish Jewish community. We're exploring the life of some of the great rabbis, Chacham Bashis, over here in depth over here. Please subscribe to the channel, everyone that you're tuning in live, and please join our community, friends, and welcome over here to our community over here, and welcome and enjoy great content here on this channel, which you have to point out over here, and welcome over here. It's we appreciate you all coming on, everyone that is live at the moment, and well done everyone, and that's very, very interesting over here. Okay, so everyone on the live chat. So now we're going to speak about Rabbi Raphael David Saban. Who was Rabbi Raphael David Saban? He was another Chacham Bashi, he was another chief rabbi of Turkey. He lived between 1877 to 1960. He was part of the Moatzot, Chevei Moatzot in Istanbul. He was a judge, a dayan. He was the head of Jewish court. He was a rabbi of the Kehila, the Italian Kehila, the Italian congregation in the city. And he would become the Chacham Bashi, the chief rabbi of Turkey also. Now, the chief rabbi we're speaking about here, this is about the fourth or fifth chief rabbi we're already speaking about here in this in-depth class over here on the history of the Turkish Jewish community. Now, obviously, being born in Istanbul itself, respectively, let's explore a bit within regards to his life. So he was was obviously part of the Ottoman Empire when he was born. His father's name was Nissim Saban, who was a merchant, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. When he was 3 years of age, he would learn at a Talmud Torah and a yeshiva in this place. He would learn, I think, under the auspices of Rabbi Konarti di Lyon, who I think he himself passed away in the Hebrew month of Shvat in Tafresh Nun Gimel. And Rabbi Yom Tov HaKohen, he would learn under his auspices. This is also another famous rabbi in Turkey who passed away in Tafresh Samach Bab. Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, I think, also would be teaching him. And when he was 16 years of age, he was already ordained to become a shochet and a bodek at that point in time, kosher slaughterer, and let's say inspector. At 17 years of age, he was already ordained to become a circumciser, a mohel. And at the end of his learnings, he would be certified as a rabbi, I think, as an educator in yeshiva of Rabbi Chaim Nasi, Harav Chaim Nasi, if I'm not mistaken, was B'Yeshiva Shel Chotno L'Atid Harav Chaim Nasi. Okay, now when he was 18 years of age, he would start working as a secretary of the Chambashi, the chief rabbi of Turkey, Rabbi Moshe Halevi, Ha'afendi, as we say. Moses Levi Ha'afendi, great rabbi was. In Kamot September 9, 1897, he would become the president of Rosa, but Harav Chaim Nasi. Shikien, he was appointed a head of Jewish court, also in Hasaki, if I'm not mistaken. When he was 22 years of age, he would be part of the Chaver Moatzot Datit Rochanit Shel Yehudit Turkey, the committee of the religious community in Turkey. And over there, he was appointed in various different parts of the congregation in Istanbul, and would form more stops over there at that point in time, different, let's say, foundations for the congregation, the Jewish congregation there. He would be part of a congregation, let's just say, of the committee at that point in time, and doing various different undertakings. That's what we have to point out also. Now, more things can be said within regards to him. I think when he was 30 years of age, he would be appointed as head of Jewish court of the area of Chaskai, and he would take this position, I believe, for 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. Come on, 1912, he was appointed the rabbi of the Kehila of Galta, if I'm not mistaken. And then he would take on various other roles also. I think במקביל לתפקידו שימש כשליחים של הרבנים משה לוי, חיים נחום וחיים ברג'ונו, נערים שבשליטת the Ottoman Empire, itself, so be close connected with all those great rabbis over there. I think Kamot Tishrei in Tafresh Pei Dalet, Persama Rabbanut Kushta Rabbanim, Yitzchak Becher Eliezer, Rafael Davitzban, Chaim Yitzchak Shaki, Rabbi Yaakov Argo Iti, Moshe Ben Chabib, Pasak Aruch, Bo Takna Shemata Ve'elech Yasu, Tana'ai B'Shad HaKidushin, שלפיהם הקדושים עושים להיבקע למפרע. פסק ערוך זה נכתב כמענה לביאת העגונת שהתגברה. פסק ערוך זה נתפס כחוברות בפני עצמה שנקראת מחברת קידושין על תנאי. וזכתה להסכמת ראש רבני קושה, הרב חיים ברג'ונה. I'm going to speak about that after. I think Rav Saban will go together with Rabbi Yaakov Gurti and Rabbi Moshe Ben Chabib. They write a letter, I think, of support at that point in time of the Agudat Rabbanim of the America and also of Canada for some reason, let's just say, of itself. That was another famous happening that occurred during his time period. I think in 1938, in the month of November, Shimesh Kenatzik Akilat Yudit B'Turkey, B'Lavayat Shel Mustafa Kama'al Torek, if I'm not mistaken. I think after passing Rabbi Chaim Yitzchak Shaki in the year 1940, Rabbi Taban was appointed to the head of Jewish court in Istanbul, and very, very prominent position. 1941, he was appointed the rabbi of the Italian congregation of Turkey, Istanbul. 1944, I think at that point in time, there was a Biker Be'izmir, L'Shem Hatarat Agunot, Pitron B'yot Nosofot, Shayu B'Kehila, Hayudit Amakomot. I think after Rabbi Ben Zion Chai Uzia was appointed to Rishon LeZion in Israel, Hotzal Rav Saban Mesheret Arav Rashi LeTel Aviv. So I think Olam Hu Sirev, I think they wanted him to become the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv at that point in time. This after Rabbi Ben Zion Chai Uzia in 1948 would come. And 1953, on 24th of January, I think he was appointed the Chambashi and the head rabbi of Turkey. very, very prominent position, let's just say, in of itself. And I think there was passing Rabbi Chaim Berjano and Rabbi Yitzchak Shaki. So he would take on these important roles, let's just say, in of itself. So that's something important we have to say within regards to that. Being the Chacham Bashir will bring about various different important positions, especially among the congregation, Jewish communication, also correspondence with the government. Also, we have to point out over there. I think he was head of the Mishlachat Shedashra in Bטורקיה, and was really doing various different important tasks at that point in time. And yes, much more can be said within regards to that. So he was another chief rabbi over there, and I think he passed away. Yeah, he passed away in 1967 on 27th of November. That was 8th of Kislev. He was buried in Beit HaKvarot, but in Istanbul also. And many people would actually come to his funeral, and I think even the governor of the city of Istanbul would come, the head of the city, General Rafik Tolja, if I'm not mistaken, and the various governors and dignitaries would also come in itself. Now, afterwards, Rabbi David Asio, who we just spoke about before, will become the next chief rabbi of Turkey, obviously between 1961 to 2002. That's interesting. I think he's got a grandson who's a famous lawyer named Rifat Saban, if I'm not mistaken, and he was an author also, if I'm not mistaken. Rabbi Saban was. He wrote the Midras LePerushim, which is Perush on the Perush of Rashi, of Nevi'im and Ketuvim, the Tanakh, respectively. This came out, I believe, after he passed away. The Dorshei Shemot, which was on the names of Gittin, let's just say, which is a manuscript form. Machveret Kiddushin al Tanai. This was a Pasak Aroch al Kata Kiddushin. This is also done along with the Rabbanim of Kushto, Istanbul, also respectively. This book in of itself, so very interesting. Now, friends, anyone that's joining in, we're exploring the Jewish history of the country Turkey over here, post 20th century. So please, anyone joining in live, subscribe to the channel over here and join our community over here and be part of it. That's something that we have to point out, and welcome everyone. And please just keep your comments well, because it's we are doing actually at the moment what's called a live video, so there's people can put comments over here, so please keep your comments respectful, and very interesting. So yes, so welcome everyone. That's something I would say over here, and we are speaking about Turkey over here. Let's continue over here. Let's speak about another rabbi. Now, another rabbi who was a prominent rabbi in Turkey was someone named Rabbi Yaakov Al-Goyiti. I think he lived between 1862 to 1944. So he was a darshan, he was a pasik halacha, he was a rabbi in Istanbul, and especially in the earlier part of the 1900s, and was an author of great Torah books. So he was born in Turkey. His father was a famous rabbi, Rabbi Avram, who was a judge over there in Turkey. Now, it's interesting, Rabbi Yaakov would actually learn under the auspices of his father and some of the great rabbis of the city, respectively over there. And the great chachamim inside the city would be doing a lot. Especially there was a huge amount of books, Torah books, in his house in of itself. And he was working as a rabbi, I think, for many years. And he was an educator also, if I'm not mistaken, all through other places. I think he would also work as a judge in Istanbul, most famously enough. He was part of the Beit Din of Rabbi Chaim Yitzchak Shaki, another famous rabbi, and also Rabbi Yitzchak Bachar Eliezer. And among some of the great dayanim, we have to point out, of that specific area, of that point in time. Now, I think he was also close to Rabbi Moshe ben Habib, Rabbi Raphael Saban, who we just spoke about just beforehand, and will continue working as a dayan in Istanbul, and will be working, I think, it will also be working a connection with the Ashkenazic Jewish community inside the city. He was also working as a mohel, a circumciser over there, and very much he was considered one of the famous rabbis over there at that point in time. I think afterwards, at one point in time, he would go to Bulgaria, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was close with other rabbis, including Rabbi Hanania Habib Azulay, Rabbi Moshe Irerit, Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank also had a connection with, and Rabbi Chaim Nasi, Rabbi Gamliel Mizrahi, Rabbi Shlomo Eliezer Elfandari, if I'm not mistaken. Very interesting. So he actually passed away in Nisan Hey Tafshin Dalad, we have to point out. So he was another famous rabbi over there, and so much can be said within regards to him. We have to point out. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he knew also Rabbi Chaim B'Jarno, if I'm not mistaken, and obviously he was the chief rabbi at that point in time. We can speak about him in a minute. Like, he wrote great Torahs, including Zechet Asot, which was on halacha, which was through the order of alphabet itself, respectively. The Shut Yerech Yaakov, which was printed in Kusha, in Hey Tavshin. The Vayishkam Yaakov, which was Chidushim on the Shas, Talmud Babli, also respectively. Yaakov HaKatan, which was on the Rambam. Vayom Yaakov, which was a manuscript form. And Machberet Kiddushin Al Tanai, which was another Pesach, which was organized itself, respectively also. But very, very interesting. So, friends, anyone tuning in, welcome to our channel, welcome to our community. We're exploring the life and the history of the Turkish Jewish community of here. So please subscribe to the channel. Now, another Chambashi we were speaking about, Rabbi Chaim Yitzchak Shaki. He lived between 1853 to 1940. His Hilula is on the 6th of. He was an Hebraist, you could say. He was an investigator, a chronicler of Israel. He was one of the famous rabbis in Istanbul. He will become the Chacham Bashi and chief rabbi of Turkey, also respectively. Let's explore a bit within regards to him. He was born, I think, in a village in Istanbul, I think quite close to Kusha, and it was a famous lineage of great families from Turkey he came from, and very, very interesting. He would learn in the Talmud Torah in Kusha when he was young, and afterwards he would learn in yeshiva of Rabbi Shlomo Kimchi, if I'm not mistaken, and would learn Talmud and various poskim, Jewish law also. And when he was about 13 years of age, I think he would actually write Pesach Halacha of Shut, Shelot, Shivot, and answers. Now, at the end of his learnings, he would actually work in trade, and I don't think he was so successful in trade business, and that was obviously a blessing, because then he would go, let's say now, inside the rabbinate in of itself, respectively, and he would be working in various different other places in of itself. He knew languages, I think. He enjoyed investigating about the chronicles of the Jewish community of all of Israel, if I'm not mistaken. He was able to speak obviously in Ladino, in Spanish, in French, in Turkish also. So he was like many of the Chambashis that would be found in many different languages. He was considered an expert within regards to the chronicles of the Jewish community of Turkey also. He was quite close to Rabbi Abraham Danon, Rabbi Shlomo, and also Shlomo Rosanis, who we've got to point out was a famous historian also who wrote books. We've spoken about him on previous occasions. And Abraham Galanti, who we're going to speak about in due course also. He was an expert on philosophy, let us say, and so on and so forth. So that's something that we have to point out. Now, I think he passed away in 1940 in Istanbul, if I'm not mistaken. It was obviously a Talmud of Rabbi Shlomo Kimchi, who we pointed out before. Let's explore a bit more within regards to him. I think a time period when I think it was Moshe Levi Effendi was a chief rabbi over there of Turkey. Rav Shaki was appointed, I think, a gazbar, maybe a treasurer of the rabbinate at that point in time. And then he would continue working part of the committee, spiritual committee, at that stage in time, the Moatz Hadatita Eliona, and he was part of the Jewish community in Turkey, had various prominent roles, part of the Jewish courts over there at that stage in time, and the Jewish community in Istanbul. He was head of Jewish courts, and the rabbi, the Karabosh Shel HaRovar Chidar Pasha Kadikai, if I'm not mistaken. He was, I think, very, very interesting. He was also in correspondence of Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi, who was, remember, we said that Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi was a chief rabbi at that stage in time of Turkey. So that's obviously he would become a chief rabbi to the 1920s when he would go to Egypt, as I mentioned before, and eventually he would become, so very, very interesting. So we're speaking about Rav Shaki over here. And I think it was in 1913, התעוררה מצד העם של הטורקית הדרישה לגייס את יהודי ארץ ישראל לצבא. יהודי ארץ חששו מגיוס רבנים ותלמיד חכמים לצבא, בעיקר בשל העידה מוסד מוסמך שהעניק להם. Okay, so we're just speaking over here, just about what happened in 1913 over here, which I think was connected to Rav Shaki, if I'm not mistaken, at that stage in time. So that was obviously a turbulent period, or period of change, let's say, at that point in time. So this would pave the way. I think Rabbi Chaim Bejano would pass away in 1931. So I think instead Rabbi Shaki will then be appointed the chief rabbi of Turkey, which was a role he would take for nearly 10 years, and he passed away on the 10th of August in 1940 over there. And thousands would attend his funeral over there. He wrote different books, as I mentioned on the outset. Among his books, there was a Law Historia Universal. This is one of his books, famous, I think, in of itself. There's another book, which is Zora Dil Imo, I think, or Mali Avot. This is another book, Perish Makif Pirkei Avot, on the ethics of the fathers, and a Kitzur on the Toldot Yehudit, the chronicles of the Jewish community, of the Chachamim and the Gedolim of his specific day, and the Bina Li'itim, which was on the Seder of the Jewish calendar also, respectively, which I think was printed in Kushta in 1897. So he was a chief rabbi of 10 years. Rabbi Shaki was. Now, another chief rabbi we're going to speak about now, Rabbi Chaim Bejano, or to give his English name, Rabbi Enrique Bechor Chaim Moshe Bejano. He was born in 1846. He passed away August 23rd, 1931. Obviously, he was also from Bulgaria, I believe. He was a poet. He was a scholar of the Ladino language. He lived and worked for many years in Romania and in Ottoman Turkey, as I said before, and would lead, obviously, the Bucharest community for 32 years, and will be the acting rabbi of Turkey until, I think, the end of his life. Now, he was born in an area called Stara Zagora, which was during the Danube-Vilat period of Bulgaria. He was the son of Moshe Bejano and Kalo, if I'm not mistaken. And Kalo was the daughter of Rabbi Yitzchak Baruch of Pleben, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I think on his father's side, he's a relative of somehow of Rabbi Sabete Dejian, who would become chief rabbi of various countries. Also, through his Dejian's mother Malka, his family, the Bejanos, are theorized to have originated from the city of Bejar in Castile, but some, I think, will disagree and dispute this and believe they came from Bejar in Portugal, respectively. And he learned Torah with his maternal grandfather, Rabbi Yitzchak Baruch Calderon, when he was young, I believe. And when he was 12, he would move to his parents afterwards. He would complete his studies across several different yeshivot, I believe, while he was younger. We have to point out. Okay, so that's very, very interesting. Now, he would, including, I think he would learn under Rabbi Nissim Alkali, who was another famous rabbi. By the age of 17, he was already ordained as a rabbi. He began his work in the city of Rus in Bulgaria. He would teach actually in the Talmud Torah at that point in time. Now, one of his students was a famous historian who I mentioned before, Salomon Abraham Rosanis, who we spoke about just before, famous historian and a historiographer, let's just say. And during this period, he studied English, French, and German, and he would teach at the Hebrew. He would teach Hebrew at Alliance Israelite University. Remember, it was a very, very busy school at that stage in time in Turkey, which we've spoken about on various occasions before. Now, I think it was during the Russo-Turkish War in the 1870s, the city of Rus was surrounded and occupied by the Imperial Russian Army, and his mother was killed by shelling from bullets. He chose to then flee with the rest of his family, as well as someone named that of Jacob Levi Moreno to Romania, who worked in Romania, I think. Interesting enough, that was a famous time period himself. He would serve as a rabbi for 32 years in Romania. He was a director of boys' school in the Sephardic community. He would teach Hebrew in the 1896 in the theology department in University of Bucharest. He was close with, you could say, more of the maskilim of that stage in time. He would actually approve the restoration of the Kahal Grand Synagogue also, and that's very, very interesting. He was often a guest at the King's Palace as a guest of Queen Elizabeth of Wede, I believe, who appreciated his wisdom due to his knowledgement. Let's see, he had knowledge in French, English, German, Italian, Turkish, Persian, and Arabic. He sometimes acted as an interpreter to the foreign minister and the court of the king. He also assisted the Romanian general Vasil Herescu Nastiu in recording, let's say, the history of the Romanian War of Independence. He was obviously a translator at that point in time. Very, very interesting enough. Now, that's very, very interesting. So he was an early supporter also of Hoveve Tzion in Romania and corresponded with other intellectuals, including Theodor Herzl, Max Norda, and Eliezer Ben Yehuda. He was an advocate for the importance of Sephardic pronunciation of Hebrew and published articles in contemporary Hebrew newspapers also, such as Hamagid, Haba Zeleth. Also, he was also the Ladino newspaper, a Telegraph, and El Tiempo. He also wrote, I think, in Romanian newspapers such as Albina and so on and so forth. In Romania, he was honored with a Knight of the Romanian Crown, and he was praised by Ernest Renan for his French to Hebrew translation of the Jules, Sign and Natural Religion. Also, he was also active in the Italian language and cultural dissemination society of Dante Alighieri, I think, respectively. I think he became the chief rabbi. Now, after 1910, Rabbi Bajano would move to Edirne in Thrace on the border of Bulgaria, where he would serve as the community's chief rabbi. He established, I think at that point in time, a school over there and helped the Jews of the city during the Balkan Wars, which were obviously devastated by local populations. After the retirement of Rabbi Chaim Nachum Effendi in 1920, Rabbi Bajano would move to Istanbul and was elected the chief rabbi, Kaymakam of Turkey, respectively, at that point in time. He lived in a transition period, you can say, of Ottoman Empire, modern Turkish Republic. He was a member of that transgeneration Sephardic Jewry. He participated, you could say, in both halachic tradition as well as affection for the land of Israel and modern culture. He, I think, corresponded with many intellectuals also, including people like Rabbi Moses Gasta, Georges Clement Kehl, and Tolo France, and Chaim Nachum Bialik, among many others. He is credited to having inspired Spanish politician, someone named Angel Polido, with working to reconcile Spaniards with descendants of Spanish Jews who were, I believe, expelled from Spain during the Spanish Inquisition, respectively. That's something we have to point out. And there was cultivation of Ladino, we could say, within Barcelona. While he was on lake vacation, I think Robert Bajano was sailing on Danube. Another passenger, someone named Dr. Angel Polido Fernandez, Spanish senator, heard him saying to his wife in ancient Spanish language, Ladino. They began a relationship, and Polido, inspired by the language, devoted himself at that point in time to the reconciliation of Spaniard Sephardic Jews who descended from the exiles of Spanish Inquisition. Now, it's interesting. He was really into Jewish Sephardic poetry. He was honored by Bialik, I think. He was elected a correspondence member of the Spanish Royal Academy. Like his daughter, I think, Diamante, collected her father's works and donated them to the Arios Montano Institute in Madrid, at the time, which was run by Jacob M. Hassan. Now, he was married to Rabbanit Reina Assa. They had 8 children, 3 sons, Marin, Sever, and Jacques, and 5 daughters, Boca Rosa, Rachel Bina, and Diamante Berries. Now, he passed away in Istanbul on August the 23rd, 1931. Very, very interesting. Now, for anyone tuning in live, we are exploring the history of the Jewish community of Turkey. So welcome to our channel and welcome to our community, anyone tuning live. We're going to just take another 1-minute break over here and we are going to continue. So please subscribe in the meantime and wait 1 minute, friends, over here.
Yeah. The nice thing about having a in New York is I'm not going to be still flood market. I mean, I was in that situation for about a year and a half, and the courses, I did something like together.
Okay, thanks everyone for waiting again, and we're going to continue about the history of the Turkish Jewish community here on this special edition over here. So everyone, welcome to the channel, and please subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And as we're exploring the history of Turkey. Now, another key rabbi, famous rabbi in Turkey, was someone named Rabbi Abraham Danon, who lived between 1857 and 1925. He actually passed away on the 22nd of April, 1925. So he was more famous rabbi in the late 19th century and earlier part of the 20th century. He was a Turkish rabbi, he was a Hebraist, he was a writer, he was a poet. He was born into a rabbinical family in Adrianopol in Turkey. In 1857, he attended the Talmud Torah in that city and would pursue his Talmudic studies in yeshiva. In 1879, he founded a Maskilic society called the Hevrot Shori Tushia, I think the Society of Proponents of Wisdom. He was also known as a Doshei HaHaskalah, I think, as seekers of enlightenment. So he was, I think, close to many people of the Haskalah movement, which promoted the study of Jewish literature and history. After having presided over a small seminary at Adrianopol, we talked about the rabbinical seminary beforehand. In 1897, he was appointed director of the rabbinical seminary founded by the Alliance Israélite Universelle in Constantinople, which we recorded a video about. That year, he went to Paris to represent Oriental Jewry at the Congress of Orientalists. He would actually move to Paris in France in August 1917 and would begin teaching at the city's École Normale Israélite Oriental. I think he would actually die there in 1925. Now, among his works, Rabbi Abraham Danon would write to many different books. I think under the title the Toldot B'nai Avraham, Rabbi Danon published a Hebrew translation of Theodor Reinach's Historia der Juifs, I think in 1888, completing the story, as he says in the preface over there respectively. I think many other books. He was an initiative letter in founding at Adrianopol in 1888, a historical review called Yosef Da'at, or El Progreso, which he published in Hebrew characteristics in Judeo-Spanish, Hebrew and Turkish. I think the aim of the review was to collect all the documents relating to the history of Oriental Jews, but the Ottoman government, I think censorship, suppressed this review together with all other published in Turkey. He published a collection of 55 Judeo-Spanish ballads, I think, which was sang in Turkey. Each ballad had been accompanied by its French translation also, so that's something else that we can point out. I think he published some studies on the Jews of Adrianopol and of Salonika, which appeared, I think, in a same review, let's just say, of itself. So let's go back to the time period of secular Turkey of the First World War. Now just exploring some more of the history again. Now, we know that World War I ended the glory of Ottoman Empire, and in its place rose a young Turkish Republic. There was someone named Mustafa Kemal Atatürk who was elected the president, and the caliphate was abolished. There was secular constitution was adopted. However, I think in reality at that point in time, Islam would remain inextricably intertwined with Turkish culture. According to a census taken in 1927, 81,872 Jews lived within the boundaries of the Turkish Republic under Mustafa Kemal, and most were concentrated in the cities of Istanbul and Izmir. Obviously, there was a crumbling empire. The Turkish Republic attempted to forge new national identity that regarded minorities with suspicion. This obviously at that point in time significantly affected the Jewish community's living conditions, as the government insisted that all Republic residents identify as Turkish. The widespread universal Israelite alliance schools that served the Jewish community were forced to break their ties with French sponsors at that point in time, and Turkish was made the language of the instruction of all schools. Although the demands, I say, were made of the Jews to integrate, they were simultaneously identified as foreigners, and a double standard, let's say, was applied to their community at that stage in time. Now, during the Second World War, Turkey was a safe passage for many Jews fleeing Nazis. Seizing opportunity in 1933, Atatürk invited prominent German Jewish professors to flee Nazi Germany and settle in Turkey before, during, and during the war. These academics contributed a great deal to the development of the Turkish university system, just using the notes from the Asia Torah website. Now, during the Holocaust, Turkish Jews remained secular, although I think Greece's nearby Jewish communities were almost wiped out. Several Turkish diplomats preserved in their efforts to save the Turkish Jews from the Holocaust, and some of them succeeded to a degree. Yes, Mr. Salahaddin, I think it was Ulkamun, was consul general of Rhodes from 1943 to 1944, was recognized by Yad Vashem, I think, as a righteous Gentile in 1990, June 1990. And the present size of Jewish community is estimated 14,500 of a total population of 85 million people. Most Jews, as I mentioned before, live in Istanbul, and 96%, as I said before, are Sephardim, respectively, and they're still legally represented by Chacham Bashi. I think they actually say there remains a small group of Karaites, about 100 people. Also in Turkey, that's what we have to point out. We talked about what happened in 1986, where there was anti-Semitism, violent anti-Semitism in the Neve Shalom synagogue, which will kill, I think at that point in time, 22 people doubling there. There was apparently an attack also on the Bet Israel congregation, killing and injuring many people also, if I'm not mistaken. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of anti-Semitism in recent years. Turkey under Erdogan, for example, was a very frightening prospect for many of the Jewish people. The Turkish leader, anti-stop aides, made anti-Semitic remarks, and under his rule, anti-Semitism has been on the rise. For example, in 2014, in response to Operation Protective Edge, over 30,000 Turkish language tweets were published, including comments that stated positive things about, God forbid, don't mention it now, Hitler and the Holocaust, among other discomforting signs of anti-Semitism. And it's just atrocious what was going on at that point in time. So that's something we have to point out. Okay, let's explore about some more of the rabbis in Turkey. Now, I think a current Ashkenazic chief rabbi in Turkey is someone named Rabbi Menachem Mendel Shitrik. He is known as Rabbi Mendel Shitrik. He's an American-Israeli and Turkish rabbi representing the Ashkenazic Jewish community since 2003, and became the chairman of the Alliance of Rabbis of the Islamic State in 2019, more recently. He grew up in Tzfat to a Hasidic family. His great-grandfather was Rabbi Yehuda Shitrik. He studied in the Chabad Yeshiva system at the Rabbinical College of America, and in Kollel Tzemach Tzedek in Jerusalem. He would receive a rabbinical ordination, I believe, from Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg of Jerusalem, also the Sephardi chief rabbis of Israel, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, and Rabbi Eliyahu Bakshi Daron, and from his maternal grandfather, the chief rabbi David Moshe Lieberman, who was the chief rabbi of Antwerp. He moved to Istanbul in 2001, and in 2003 he would become the rabbi of the Ashkenazic Jewish community of Turkey, a small and ancient community, let's say, that existed for centuries and predates, I think, a much larger and more famous Sephardic community, whose members settled in Istanbul mostly after the expulsion of Spain. In 2019, he was elected the chairman of the ARIS, the Alliance of Rabbis of Islamic States, which is a very, very prominent position, let's just say, in of itself. So over there, he is responsible. Obviously, he's part of the Chabad movement, which we have to point out. Also, he's involved in interfaith activities, focused on Jewish and Muslim relations. He travels extensively and writes about many history of Jews in Anatolia, if I'm not mistaken. And I think he traveled very much in Anatolia in summer of 2021. He is responsible for the Jewish community of Turkey, leads a KTR, the Turkey's chief rabbinic kashrut department for exports. He's responsible for kosher standards at the Emirati Agency of Kosher Certification. He is also a field representative for the Orthodox Union and other major organizations at that stage in time. So that's something also we have to point out also. So anyone tuning in at the moment, we're recording a live video here of the Turkish Jewish community history. This is part number 4. So please subscribe to the channel, everybody, and welcome to our community. So he would take that on, and I think it was he would supervise, I think, the kosher kitchen, most famously in 2002 during the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. That's another interesting tidbit about him. Now, I think he's married to Rabbanit Chaya. She's actually from the Shochet family, if I'm not mistaken. They were married in the year 2000. Have been involved in strengthening Jewish life and let's say Jewish learning in Istanbul, also most famously through classes, I think large-scale Jewish holiday events, one-on-one counseling they would do, Shalom Bayit, daily prayer services. They have, I think, as of recently, I think 8 children. They run an open house in Istanbul. where local residents and travelers from all over the world will come on Shabbat and holidays also. Some of the activities, yeah, very, very interesting. So, I think he's published also several books on Jewish life also in Turkish, and was involved in the publication on Turkish Sephardic customs. He's fluent in Ladino and in 6 other languages, if I'm not mistaken, and he lectures on the history and customs of Turkish Jews. So that's very, very interesting that we have to point out within regards to him. Now, I believe the new chief rabbi of Turkey is someone named Rabbi David Sevi, who I think was a sole candidate in the community elections. I think it was actually held in September 28th to 29th in 2005. He became the chief rabbi over there, and I think elected as the 4th chief rabbi of the Republic of Turkey and the 34th since Ottoman Empire, let's just say. I believe he took on this role and served in various capacities, let's say, within the Jewish community since 1967. Rabbi Sevi has played an active role, let's just say, in social services. He's held leadership positions. He has been part of board memberships across numerous foundations and associations. He's widely recognized in Turkey and abroad for his expertise, let's say, in distinctive Maftiri musical and tradition, I think, which blends with Turkish melodies, Jewish liturgical hymns. His pioneering contributions, let's say, to preserving and transmitting the tradition have earned him multiple awards and strengthened his reputation as a cultural bridge builder and a respected religious leader in Turkey. Rabbi Sevi has deep roots in religion, legal and cultural spheres, especially his predecessor's example. Rabbi Sevi was appointed to this position for, let's say, renewable 7-year term. And let's say, very, very interesting, let's just say of itself. The chief rabbinate of Turkey is obviously a contemporary embodiment of deep-rooted historical heritage. It is functions as a spiritual authority of the Jewish community and as a pivotal institution that shapes its relations with the state and broader society. The recent election of Rabbi David Sevi as a chief rabbi demonstrates, let's just say, the community's capacity for internal unity and consensus, as well as commitment to constructive dialogue within regards to Turkish dignitaries and so on and so forth. So he's a very well-respected figure in the Turkish Jewish community. He was also, I believe, also the chief Chazan for many years and played, let's say, a key role in preserving the Sephardic liturgical traditions of Turkey, also respectively. That's something that we have to point out also within regards to him. Anyone tuning live, we are exploring the history of the Jewish community of Turkey over here on this special edition of it. It's actually part number 4 of the entire program that we're doing at the moment. I'm just going to go for a short walk, but we're going to continue this. So anyone tuning in live at the moment, please subscribe to our channel. We are nearing at the moment a staggering, at the moment, 8,000 subscribers. So it's part of all this part. We've been speaking about the 20th century Turkey, 21st century Turkey time period over here. In the previous parts, part 2 and part 3, we explored more 19th century Turkey. And before that, in the first part, if you watch over the previous videos that we recorded, it was really pre-19th century where we did the detailed, I think, close to 2-hour presentation at that stage in time. So we could have went on much more and said much more within regards to the country itself, but this is the amounts we've got at this stage in time as we're just going to continue. So please, in the meantime, everyone, subscribe to the channel as we continue our video here on Turkey. Over here, just by a bit of sunshine at the moment to continue and progress this video where we've left off at. So Rabbi Sevi himself, obviously a well-represented, respected figure. He was the chief Chazan for many years, played a huge role in preserving Sephardic liturgical traditions of Turkey, and his appointment, let's say, of acting chief rabbi marks a significant moment for the community itself, which continues, let's say, the rich traditions and heritage. Obviously, there's challenging modern times also. So who is Rav Sevi itself? Let's explore a bit within regards to his history. I think he comes from a family, a rich heritage, let's just say, of Torah community, and so on and so forth from Turkey. He had great Torah education in his younger years, which we're going to explore now over here, friends. He was born into a family spanning centuries in Turkey. Rabbi Sevi, I think, has dedicated his life, this is what's according to one of the websites out there, to Jewish education, spiritual leadership, and the preservation of Sephardic customs, that has to be pointed out. I think his expertise, let's say, in liturgical music and his commitment to communal service earned him widespread respect among the Turkish Jews and beyond. He is a world-renowned expert on the makamim, let's say, of Turkish Jewry, the unique Eastern scale of Sephardic liturgy used in our communities for more than 500 years. Literally means, let's say, place in Arabic, a makam, a plural makamim, is what is that? A standard melody type and a set of related tunes. I think the melodies used is in a given makam aims, let's just say, itself to effectively express emotional state of the render throughout the liturgy itself, respectively. So he can see he's really top. He was a top candidate. As acting chief rabbi, he would oversee religious affairs, provide guidance to the community, and especially in a turbulent time, let's say, in the community all over the world with anti-Semitism, and international Jewish organizations will very much be associated with in of itself. So we wish him luck, and he's a chief rabbi now of Turkey. Let's explore some of the history, list of some of the famous synagogues itself, just a few of them. We'll maybe speak in a bit more detail about them. The Hiehudit synagogue was founded in 1460. Ashkenazi synagogue was founded in the year 1900. It's located in Beogio. We'll speak about that. Ben Kuri synagogue in 19th century, respectively. The Beit Abraham synagogue in 1920s. The Beit Israel synagogue, 1920s. The Bet Nisim synagogue in the 1840s. The Bet Yaakov synagogue in 1878 was founded. I think more synagogues were founded. Anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of the Turkey Jewish community. Then there was Burgazi Eyo synagogue, which was founded, I believe, in 1968. The Kibbutz synagogue was founded in 1953, and some more synagogues also. We're just exploring some of the synagogues also. Just have a list over the Etz Chaim synagogue, the Istiupol synagogue, the Hemdat Israel synagogue was founded in 1899, the Chesed Avraham synagogue was founded in the 1920s, the Italian synagogue in the 19th century, the Kol Kados synagogue in 1880s. This is just a few of the synagogues. I'm not going to be able to speak and mention all of them respectively over here because there were so many over here in Turkey. Neve Shalom, which was a victim of that terrorist attack, was founded in 1951. The Or Hadash synagogue was formed in 1896. The Tofrei Begadim synagogue was founded in 1894. I believe then another synagogue, I think of the name the Yanboy synagogue and the Tofrei Begadim synagogue, as we mentioned about before. And let's speak about a few of the synagogues. There were many synagogues in Izmir also, including the Kemerati synagogues, the Al-Ghazi synagogue, the Ashkenazi synagogue over there in Izmir. There was a Dini Shalom synagogue over there, the Beit Israel synagogue of Izmir, the Beit Hillel synagogue, the Bikur Cholim synagogue, the Etz Chaim synagogue over there, Los Restauros synagogue, the Hebra synagogue, the Kahal Kadosh synagogue over there, the Portugal synagogue in Izmir, Shari HaShamayim synagogue in Izmir. And I think there was others also. There were synagogues in Adani, in Ankara also, and various other places. Bursa, I think including the Meir synagogue and the Etz Aaron synagogue over there, and the Gerush synagogue in Kanakel, in Edirne. There was famous Grand synagogue in Edirne. There was the Gazinterp in Kilis, I think also there was synagogue. Let's explore some of the synagogues now in a bit more detail. We can't speak about all of them over at the moment, also time limited at the moment. There was the Ashkenazi synagogue of Istanbul, which was a congregation, obviously Ashkenaz, and near the Galata Tower in Karadki neighborhood. The congregation, I think it's Ashkenazi prayer. It's only, I think, if I'm not mistaken, currently active Ashkenazi synagogue in Istanbul, which is open to visits and prayers, as I say. The synagogue was founded, I think, by Jews of Austrian origin at the start of the 20th century in 1900. I think it was originally built in Osterriescher Temple, also known as Austrian Temple. I think built in 1831, reflected Austrian architectural sensibilities and was a hub of the Ashkenazi Jewish community in the 19th century. And I think it was destroyed in 1866, the structure was, and left a void in spiritual life over there. And as we said before, I think the Ashkenazi community itself only makes about 4% currently of the Turkish Jewish community. And another famous synagogue, the Neve Shalom synagogue, which was built, I believe, in the year 1910. 1951, and we've spoken about this already here on this class, the Neve Shalom Synagogue, Beit Knesset Neve Shalom. Obviously, it follows Sephardic rite of prayer over here in of itself. The synagogue was built in response to increased Jewish population in Old Galata neighborhood, and in the late 1930s, Neve Shalom Synagogue itself, I think, was central and largest Sephardic synagogues, I think, in Istanbul, open to service, especially on Shabbat, high holidays, bar mitzvahs, funerals and weddings. And a Jewish primary school was torn down in 1949 for that purpose, and the synagogue was built, I believe, in the ruins. The construction completed in 1951. Its architects included Elio Ventura and Bernard Motolo, young, let's say, Turkish Jews at that point in time. And the inauguration of the synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, was held on Sunday, March the 25th, 1951. Now, at that point in time, the President's chief rabbi, Rabbi Raphael David Saban, was over there. Now, we spoke about the terrorist attacks. Unfortunately, this synagogue did suffer over here. Maybe we'll speak about it again over here now. Sadly, we see anti-Semitism that's taken place all throughout different points in time. The Neve Shalom obviously was impacted in 1986, 1992 and 2003 by attacks. 1986, we talked about a gunman that opened fire and 22 people died. There was a bomb attack in 1992 carried out by two men that didn't cause any damage or casualties, I think, at that stage in time, thank God. But it did leave obviously fear and damage also in of itself. I think in November 16th, 2003, the synagogue was hit by one of 4 car bomb attacks carried out in Istanbul. And you saw, even though I think local Turkish militant group, the Great Eastern Islamic Raiders Front, claimed responsibility for the attacks, police claimed the bombings were too sophisticated to have been carried out by that group. It's a very, very sad incident that actually took place in Turkey. Now, friends, we're not speaking about more of the older synagogues. I think on the first part of the series, if you go back to part 1, we spoke about more of the older synagogues of Istanbul also. We'll point that out. Another famous synagogue is the Hesed LaAvraham synagogue. This was, I think, known as the Boy Kada synagogue, or Hesed Beit Abraham. I think it was completed in 1920s and open, I think, during the summer months, open for tefillot also. So I'm not sure if it's still active now per se. The Hemdat Israel synagogue, that's another synagogue. I think it's in the Jewish quarter of Haydar Pasa in Kadikoy, on the Asian side of Istanbul, Turkey. It was completed in 1899, and I think by contacting Chief Rabbinate, one can actually visit it. Another key synagogue, the Bet Yaakov synagogue, the Bet Jacob synagogue, located on the Lisaida Street, if I'm not mistaken, Asian side of the Bosphorus in Istanbul province of Turkey. Its accepted construction date, I think, was in 1878. However, more recent research suggests maybe as early as 1862. The Ottoman Sultan granted permission for the synagogue's renovation, and this suggests the building may have been erected at an earlier date. Now, the Jewish population of Gozuyanik moved away in recent years, but the synagogue, I think, is kept alive by people that pray there, whose families originate from there. The synagogue is open, yet I think only for Shabbatim and maybe Chagim, if I'm not mistaken. Another famous current synagogue, Yenokoi Synagogue, is located, I believe, on the Koybasis Avenue, northern part of the Bosphorus in Ikuli, neighborhood of Istanbul. The synagogue was funded, I think, by someone named Abraham Solomon Kamadano in the late 19th century, and was rejuvenated by the renewal presence of the Jews who moved into the area. And the synagogue obviously is open for Shabbat services also. Very interesting. Anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of the Turkish Jewish community. So please subscribe to the channel now if you are new, and join our community now. So welcome everyone. Another synagogue is a Bet Israel synagogue in Izmir over here, which is a Jewish congregation, obviously located on the I think the Milhat Pasa Street, if I'm mistaken, in Turgut Rice neighborhood. I think it was completed in 1907, the largest synagogue in the city, and has been pointed out. Izmir's Jewish community was granted state permission to build a synagogue in 1905, opened 2 years later. Now, I think, very, very interesting. The synagogue was, I think, renovated also in 1954. Now, sadly, there was anti-Semitism. I think in 2019, in April, an attacker threw a Molotov cocktail, at the synagogue, which I think fell on the sidewalk, if I'm not mistaken, but it didn't destroy the synagogue. The attacker claimed that they were trying to protest the state of Israel. Now, a prominent member of the ruling of the Justice and Development Party immediately condemned, the attack. The official said there's no difference between attacks targeting synagogues, churches, and mosques. They all target social peace with their hate, let's just say. Izmir's Jewish community, would praise the local law enforcement for their quick action at that point in time. We have to point out that also over there in the credit of the local for enforcement over there. Now, the Grand Synagogue of Edirne, there's another key synagogue, let's just say, known as the Adrianople Synagogue, an Ottoman Jewish congregation synagogue located in Edirne, in of itself. This is a key place also. And to talk about, I think it was completed in 1909, or in a Moorish revival style. The synagogue was restored following the Second World War, and 1980 restored an active synagogue in 2015. I think the 1905 Great Fire of Adrianople destroyed more than 1,500 homes, also damaged several synagogues in the city. 20,000 strong community urgently needed a place of worship following the permission of the Ottoman government and the edict of Sultan Abdul Hamid. I think the construction of a new synagogue began on January the 6th, 1906, and the site ruined, let's just say, by synagogues of Munar, if I'm not mistaken. And that would be put out. I think architectural style, let's just say, costing 1,200 gold coins. It was opened, to service on the eve of Pesach, 1909, if I'm not mistaken, and accommodated 1,200 people to pray, 900 men, 300 women. It was Europe's largest, the third largest Beit Knesset and largest in Turkey, respectively. That's something we have to point out about this synagogue itself. We can say more with regards to it. 1983, the synagogue was abandoned after most of the Jewish community left the city, emigrating to Israel, Europe, and North America. 1995, the temple, by law, came under the control of the governmental Turkish Foundation's institution, would see the restorement of the synagogue. This was abandoned and ruined synagogue, as well as its outbuilding, were restored by the Turkish Foundation's institution in 5 years, spending, $5,750,000, approximately $2.5 million. On March 26, 2015, the synagogue was reopened with a celebration and a Shacharit morning prayers, at that point in time, attended by a large number of Jews, including Yitzhak Ibrahim Hazard, the leader of the Jewish community in Turkey. Also, Rabbi Naftali Haleva, who was a deputy to the Hacham Bashi of Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Halevi, at that point in time, would also attend it. And the Prime Minister of Turkey, interesting enough, will also take place, and other Turkish high officials. Now, the worship, let's just say, in of itself, was overseen by Rabbi David Azuz, also, who had led the service at that point in time on the closing day, 36 days before, if I'm not mistaken. And the municipality of Edirne held a huge banner in the streets of the synagogue and granted the guests with the words, "Welcome home," and our old neighbours. So that was obviously very much appreciative of the Jewish community over there. Now, the current co-president of the Jewish community, according to the World Jewish Congress website, is Isaac Ibrahimzadeh and Errol Cohen, I believe. Currently, there happen to be. Now, religious culture and cultural life of the Turkish Jewish community currently, we're going to talk about a little bit about. There are currently 26 active synagogues. Istanbul, obviously, the Neve Shalom synagogue, in Karakoy being the most notable one. Other notable synagogues include Ahrida synagogue and the historical neighborhood of Balat, which is 5 centuries old, and the Ashkenazi synagogue near the Galata Tower, and the only active Ashkenazi synagogue in the city. There's the Turkey's Jewish Museum was actually, interesting enough, inaugurated in November 2001. Limud Turkey takes place, once a year in autumn, and attracts 1,000 people to their activities with they have prolific speakers that come about over their Jewish education also in Turkey. Let's speak about the community maintains a school complex including elementary and secondary schools for around 600 students. There are active Jewish community centres over there that take care of the youth in Istanbul, is reported over Jewish media currently. I think there is also in Istanbul, I think a weekly newspaper called the Salom is published over there and available throughout Istanbul. It is a Turkish language publication, but also contains a page of news and features in Ladino and I think maybe in also other, will feature other things also within regards to it. It publishes a monthly magazine also. Now the relations with Israel within regards to Turkey, we've spoken about, it's taken a hit, I believe, in recent years, we have to point out. I think obviously not as great as it was. There are approximately 77,000 Israelis of Turkish descent, including notable figures such as people like comedian Adi Ashkenazi, musician Shlomo Shabbat. Israel was one of the 10 most important export markets for Turkish products globally, and Turkish Airlines is the second largest airline in the Israeli market, after obviously carrier El Al also respectively. I don't know if this is still current in of itself. Let's talk about the Jewish cemetery over here in Turkey. And there's a Jewish cemetery of the name the Ulus Sephardi Jewish Cemetery. This is a burial ground on Sephardic Jewish community in Istanbul, established in the year 1901 during the Ottoman Empire era, and in the neighborhood of Besiktas district of Eastern Europe. I think the cemetery is situated today in an area which developed in the history of the countryside to an upscale neighborhood called Ulus. Its initial name, Arnavutköy, a Jewish cemetery, is still in use today. It was reported that due to the location of the cemetery in the city's one of the most expensive quarters, only wealthy people are interred in the ultra luxury of the Ulus cemetery, while people who cannot afford the very high amount of ordination requested for a resting place are transferred to the cemetery in an area called Kilyos, I believe. It's actually called in itself, which lies about 40 kilometers far away from the city centre in the northern part of Istanbul. Very, very interestingly enough. So I think the religious burial services is provided at the site of the Neve Shalom Synagogue Foundation, which also carries out maintenance of the cemetery. So very important information as we explore the history of Turkish Jewry over here. So the cemetery is situated in an area which developed in the history from countryside to upscale neighborhoods, as I say, and there exists another Jewish cemetery in the Ulus Ashkenazi Jewish Cemetery, which is reserved for Ashkenazic Jews. It's about 500 meters south of the Sephardic Jewish Cemetery on the same street. So very, very interesting. So there's I think Jewish cemeteries in Istanbul, there's other ones also we have to point out, including the Baj Larbasi Jewish Cemetery. There's the Haskoy Karaite Jewish Cemetery, the Haskoy Sephardi Jew Cemetery also, the Judeo-Italian Community Cemetery, the Kilyos Jewish Cemetery, the Kuzgun-Kok Nakastape Jewish Cemetery, and the Ortakoy Jewish Cemetery also, which I have to point out also over there. So many people were buried, Jewish people obviously, in this specific district. Let's speak about a few more prominent people, let's just say, in Turkish Jewry during that time period, not necessarily rabbis over here. Someone named Uzeyir Gari. He lived between 1929 to 2001. He was a Jewish Turkish engineer, a businessman, a writer and an investor. I think graduated actually from the Istanbul Teknik University, and they would grant him an honorary PhD, I think, in his life, a doctorate degree, and he was successful in the Turkish Air Force, we have to point out. He would have a decorated career, let's just say, in of itself. He was considered one of the best engineers in the country, I think, and he would, in 1954, he joined someone named Ishak Ataton in founding what was to become the Al-Arq holding, for which he served, I think, as president for many, many years. So he was a famous person of his time and very big notable, let's just say, would do a lot of philanthropy work. Vitaly Hako is another person, lived between 1913 to 2007. He was a Turkish businessman, the founder of the Vako business, if I'm not mistaken, clothing business also. And he was actually buried in the Ulus Jewish Cemetery, if I'm not mistaken, connected to Neve Shalom Synagogue. And very, very famous in his industry, in the clothing business, as to say, in himself. Jewish businessman, and very, very a philanthropist, I believe also he happened to have been. Now, I think there's many other rabbis that's been working in recent years in Turkey, very much connected to the Shehbar Sephardic sense, including Rabbi in Istanbul, Rabbi Yitzhak Baluf, another Rabbi in Istanbul, Rabbi Aaron Edili, another Rabbi Albert Gershon, and Rabbi Isaac Perez, if I'm not mistaken, also we have to point out. And I think there's another rabbi also connected to the SSC, Rabbi Yossi Haliwa, if I'm not mistaken. So Rabbi Isaac Perez, I think, connected to, all of them are connected very much to Istanbul. So let's speak a bit about Rabbi Yitzhak Al-Aluf over here, who's another key rabbi in, I think, more currently in Turkey. And he has great genealogical roots, I see, in Turkey. And going back all the way to 1492, I think Rabbi Al-Aluf is one of 5 rabbis in Turkey that sits on the Bet Din, ordained in 1997 by Rabbi Al-Aluf. And I think what's interesting is there's a Neve Shalom synagogue, obviously, that was spoken about at the beginning. And very, very interesting enough. And he was connected, I think, very much to the Bet Israel synagogue also. So that's Rabbi Yitzhak Al-Aluf. Now, another key rabbi, Rabbi Isaac Perez, also once again associated to SSC, let's say, respectively. He is, if I'm not mistaken, he received his rabbinical ordination in the SSC in 1998. And he was one of 5, let's just say, at that point in time, 5 rabbis who sits on the Bet in the Jewish court. He also supervises all the kosher slaughtering in Turkey. He's a teacher at the Euless School. And Rabbi Perez believes his family arrived in what is now Turkey in 1492. Very interesting enough. With at least 50 boys a year becoming bar mitzvah in Istanbul, he teaches an entire curriculum of Torah, Gemara, and Jewish history, and Halakha, Jewish law also. And he's a rabbi of the Tiferet Israel on the European side in the, I think, Istenia community. I think he's lived there, and each Shabbat and holidays they do services, I think, for the community. I don't know if this is as of current, let's just say, in of itself, but very, very interesting. Now, let's speak about another famous person, Rabbi, I think, Abraham Galante, another one that was more earlier time period. We forgot to mention about him. He started his career as a writer and a journalist, another famous Turkish rabbi. He was the only historian, he was a historian also, of his age, who devoted his life to the study of Jewish communities in Turkey. We're going back quite a bit. He was born actually in 1873 in Antalya, and he died in 1961 in Istanbul. He was descended from a long line of rabbis who had written numerous works on religious and philosophical topics. In 1947, Rabbi Abraham El-Malach published in Istanbul Rabbi Galante's earnest his philosophical topics. In 1947, Abraham Al-Malach published, I think, Galante's biography, Le Professor Abraham Galante, Sa vie et ses avoras. Now, Rabbi Galante adhered to Ernest Renan's theory that one can only understand an idea if one can read it in the language in which it's originally expressed. That was his shita itself. He himself knew Turkish, Hebrew, Ladino, Arabic, Greek, Italian, Latin, French, English, and German. Very, very proficient languages. From 1914 to 1933, Galante was of the staff of the University of Istanbul, where he taught comparative grammar and Semitic languages, ancient history, and Oriental peoples. In 1943, he was elected to represent the Nikda at the Great National Assembly. He wrote, let's say, many works at that stage in time, in Turkish and in French, and he always reproduced documents and statements in their original languages. When once asked whether his labours were appreciated by his fellow Jews in Turkey, he would reply, "My books are printed in Istanbul and read abroad." So he was maybe hinting something at that point in time. He was not the first historian of Turkish history. He owed much to his predecessors, such as M. Franco, Solomon Rosanis, who we spoke about on various occasions before, Rabbi Abraham Danon, Rabbi Baruch Mitrani, Judah Nechama, and Rabbi Galanti, however, carried out intensive research in the archives of Ottoman Empire and Greek and Armenian texts. Now, Galanti, I'm not sure if he was a rabbi or not, so if I made a mistake over there and gave him the title, I'm not sure if he actually was himself, but he was definitely a very proficient historian, a key figure in Turkey in the 20th century. In January 1957, there was a poet, a young one, Joseph Habib Geres, who organized celebrations to mark the occasion of the historian's 84th birthday. Many distinguished persons attended this, I think, He would receive messages from Alliance University in Jerusalem and other individuals, let's just say, in itself. Galante published fewer than 57 works, starting in 1925, I think with Hamurbo Code in Turkish. 2 years later, in 1927, he published, I think, the 5 studies of the 3 legislators' views of commercial transactions and various other important, let's just say, in that industry, the works in of itself, let's just say, interesting. There was someone else of the name Rabbi, I think Dr. David Marcus was another key figure in the 20th century, very early part. Let's speak about him for a minute, also here in Turkey. I think on December the 30th, 1900, Dr. David Marcus would come to Istanbul as a Rabbi to Ashkenazi community. He was a native of von Novograd and studied in Yeshivot of Lomza and Mariampol under the guidance of Rabbi Lobel Plotzker, who awarded him with a diploma of a rabbi over there. And Dr. Rabbi Marcus would go to the Bonn University, where he studied psychology, I think at the time psychology, philosophy, and child education. He became the rabbi of one of Dusseldorf synagogues and was frequently mentioned in the Jewish press of Germany. This led to Austrian community of Istanbul to invite him to take up the post of headmaster of the Goldschmidt School. He became the religious leader of Turkey's Ashkenazim. In 1901, Dr. Marcus published in Halle, Germany, a psychologist study entitled, a specific title in 1908. I think at that point in time there was if I'm not mistaken, there was a constitution in 1908 of Turkey, which was proclaimed. He obtained Turkish nationality. He then established and directed an association for the study of Turkish language among Turkish Jews. He also granted further financial assistance at that point in time to establish 2 other schools at that point in time. Anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of Turkey in the 20th century, so please subscribe to our channel over here and join our community. We've got fantastic content over here. Now, I think the Balkan Wars, if I'm not mistaken, 1912 would result, if I'm not mistaken, in the uprooting of 635 families, and mainly women and children who sought refuge in Istanbul. Several Jewish organizations were concerned with the urgent task of relief, and Dr. Marcus acted as an agent, let's just say, of the Hilfe Severin, and on behalf, he gave those various bodies a weekly sum of 10,000 gold francs. Dr. Marcus was very active in coordinating the work of relief of the victims of the 1914 to 1918 war, and was appointed working chairman in the Commission Centrale des Secours established jointly in the Hilfe Severin and the Joint Distribution Community of New York. Apart from the functions of rabbi of the Ashkenazi community, Dr. Marcus was a member of the Istanbul Bet Din from 1922 to 1940. He was a headmaster of the Lycée Joif B'nai B'rith, I think, in 1932. He became a proprietor and editor-in-chief of a periodical over there. He was a prolific writer, also a journalist. He was literary contributions, would contribute to many, I think, at various different stages of time, which is very, very interesting. So, yeah, I think this was a special edition. I hope we got a good briefing and outline. There was also another famous rabbi, someone named Rabbi Baruch HaKohen, who was also, I think, a president of the Bet Din, the Rabbinical Court of Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. And I think in the very early 1960s, he served the then chief rabbi, Rabbi David Essio, maybe part of the Bet Din over there, and which is very, very interesting. So more can be pointed about that. But I think this was a very brief overview of the 20th century. And yeah, we are exploring over here the history of the Turkish Jewish community over here. So welcome over here to our community. Please subscribe over here. This was part 4 of the Jewish community of Turkey. We spoke about the history. First part, as we said before, concentrated on really pre-19th century. Then we did 2 parts, part 2 and part 3. We predominantly spoke about, let's say that's it in time, 19th century Turkey. And over here on this 2-hour feature, we've now spoken all of a sudden about 20th century, post-20th century, also current time period. There was much more we could have read over, but this could have been in many more parts also, but it's meant to be a brief outline as possible. We already covered about 25 to 30 countries. We've explored the history. We last night recorded about the United Arab Emirates. So I'd recommend everyone, if you're tuning in live, to watch that video. We're going to try and speak more about various European countries also in the series in the coming weeks. We've really concentrated a lot on South America quite recently, and also Central America. We spoke about places like Panama, Costa Rica we spoke about, and we spoke also about various Asian countries. So that will be definitely a very exciting project to work on. And what we try and do is, in these videos, we speak about who were the famous rabbis of yesteryear in all these different places. So that's something else that we like to concentrate on and to speak about in a great amount of abundance and detail, which is very, very interesting. So I like to go to different places also to record these videos. And we did this in just a bagel restaurant over here today, here in the city of Bet Shemesh, which is also exciting over here. And yeah, I hope it was informative. Also, this video was, and yeah, also videos also on this channel of many great rabbis of yesteryear. So we've already recorded about approximately 1,400 rabbis here on this series, which is a phenomenal achievement we have to point out. So that is really going from strength to strength. So please, everyone, watch over those videos we recorded previously, which we have to point out. And we're a community over here. We explore the history of many great rabbis over here, 1,400 videos. We also did a series, if I'm not mistaken, where we covered the history of different synagogues, different yeshivot, also inside Israel. That was another project that we worked on also, which was very, very exciting. And also on this channel, we record tours all over Israel. We explore the various different archaeologies there is in this fantastic country. If you watched over all the tours, we've toured all over Jerusalem, so please watch over that section inside the channel, and various different parts of Bet Shemesh. So I recommend everyone to watch over those videos that we recorded on a previous occasion within regards to that. And yeah, we're doing much more also over here on this channel. So we're really going from strength to strength. So I can't recommend enough for people to subscribe to the channel and join. And yeah, I think wishing you all well here at the moment, just recording this from the city of Bet Shemesh like usual. And yeah, please everyone subscribe to the channel. It was a pleasure many of you watching this today. Also do tours of different buildings in Israel also, which is something else that we have to point out, different shops we go around. So very many different exciting undertakings we're doing all over the country. So that's something to point out and something to be excited about. And you know, we're very privileged over here also. So yeah, just wishing you all a fantastic day. Thanks for watching and spending the time. And please subscribe to the channel. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.